Hello, my name is Ashanti Desrusso, and I will be doing my presentation on the concept of changing attitudes and social influence. Let's start by defining social influence. I believe social influence is a huge part of an individual's development of attitudes. Social influence happens when one's emotions, thoughts, opinions, or behaviors are affected by others. Within this presentation, I will be discussing how attitudes are formed, how social influence is part of it, and if attitudes can actually change, specifically negative attitudes. Negative attitudes towards person, object, or idea arise as a result of the conformity of people within a social group or society. What I mean by this is, when individuals conform to the likes and dislikes of individuals in their society, they may develop and possess more negative attitudes. When developing attitudes, Saul Kassim, Stephen Fine, Hazel Rose Marcus said that an attitude is a positive, negative, or mixed evaluation of an object that is expressed at some level of intensity, nothing more, nothing less. Like love, like, dislike, hate, admire, and detest. Those are the kinds of words people use to describe their attitudes. Our attitudes seem to develop from what we experience and observe. Research shows that attitudes are formed by experience and evaluative conditioning. When people develop strong attitudes towards neutral objects because of their association with the positive and negative stimuli, our attitudes develops as we live our lives. The strength of an attitude can influence behavior. It is very likely to adopt the same attitude of those you are constantly around, and you are likely to feel as strongly as they do about an attitude, which makes you more likely to resist change. Our attitudes are very important as it decides the behavior pattern of a person. Psychologists Agen and Fishbein discovered a process called theory of planned behavior. In this theory, attitudes toward a specific behavior combine with subjective norms and perceived behavior control to influence a person's intentions. These intentions in turn guide but do not completely determine behavior. This theory places the link between attitudes and behavior within a broader context. Our attitude towards something that was formed through influence and observation combines with social norms, which is what others would do, to form our behavior. According to Kassim, Fine, and Marcus, research shows that when people are surrounded by others who are like-minded, the attitudes they hold are stronger and more resistant to change. Social norm is defined as a general rule or conduct reflecting standards of social approval and disapproval. One example that I decided to use for social influence is slavery. Slavery is a good example of how social influence shapes an individual's attitude, resulting in behavior. In this case, negative behavior. Over the years, we have reduced slavery in the US. However, it is still very prevalent. Individuals were conditioned from birth to be prejudiced and racist towards individuals of a darker complexion. Seeing colored individuals mistreated brought Caucasians a sense of joy rather a sense of pain because of the attitudes that were passed down to them and the attitudes they observed from their peers. It was so hard for them to stray from their social norms. It was so hard for them to change their negative attitudes towards people of color. It got to the point where we had to have a war about it. The context I decided to use to continue my slavery example of social influence is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This novel is a science fiction novel about a modern-day black woman being dragged back in time to save the life of her white ancestor. Throughout the book, she is trying to persuade him to change his racist ways to help him survive. In the book, she says, he wasn't a monster at all, just an ordinary man who sometimes did the monstrous things his society said were legal and proper. He grew up on a slave plantation. He was wealthy. He watched women be disrespected left and right. He watched blacks be enslaved left and right. He adopted this culture and couldn't let it go. The boy already knew more about revenge than I did. What kind of man was he going to grow up into? Racism was seen as an acceptable social behavior. All of this contributed to not being able to change her ancestors' attitude. At the end of the book, she ends up killing her ancestor because he continues to refuse change. Attitudes can be changed in two ways. Either they get motivated or they get influenced. Kassan, Fine, and Marcus said, through persuasive communications and the mechanisms of self-persuasion, the processes of changing attitudes and behavior are complex and intertwined. It does take time and energy to change one's attitude. The individual must be willing to change. If the individual is not willing to change, the process will not work. They must be open to viewing different attitudes. To end slavery, we adopted ideas and customs from other individuals to help us break free from the discrimination. Like I was saying earlier, you need to be willing and able to go through the work to change your negative attitudes. If you are not willing to change your attitude, that just describes the strength of the attitude. I would like to close this presentation by saying our attitudes are formed by what we are exposed to. Negative attitudes easily happen due to individuals blatantly conforming to the majority. This is how racism started. Fascinating and charming leaders influence individuals to share the same beliefs. Fear of changing your attitude is what keeps the negative cycle going. Please open yourself up to more ideas and expand your mind so that we can all experience a positive life and spread that positivity. Thank you for listening to my presentation on social influence and changing attitudes.